One of the next things that I wanted to ask about was the format. You have a .riv file format,
Yep.
and like you'd sort of talked about like traditionally how SVG and images and videos are like representative of very different things. You're very explicitly making an interactive sort of experience, and that is different than making static graphics. And at the same
Yep.
time, a lot of tools, this goes back to, this is an age-old problem. When you're generating code that is supposed to run on some platform and you're doing it with a visual tool, oftentimes performance is the trade-off that you make, such that a designer can come in and
Yep.
like see their vision happen without a developer needing to be involved. Usually it's like there's a performance trade-off. So as much as you're able,
Yep.
what are the decisions that y'all made to like make it performant? Like, what does the format look like, or whatever you can
Yeah.
describe there? I'm curious about that.
I think, yeah, my co-founder would be able to describe this better. I can share that it's binary. It's a binary format, so that just keeps it like super lightweight. It is open source. We have some documentation on our site, like how the format, it's under advanced topics in our docs, how the format is created and built up and everything. I think the team has plans once we release some of the big features I was just talking about to go back and create like more documentation around how to actually generate the format yourself. And in some of the runtimes, like I believe in Unity, you can actually generate the graphics procedurally and the format procedurally and stuff like that. But I think at the core of the performance question is really the fact that our runtime is C++, and that the file format itself doesn't run any code to date. Once we add scripting, that's one of the things we're exploring, is how do we actually have we have assets that come packaged either in the Rive file or externally, like images and audio and fonts today are things that are assets that can come with the Rive or externally dynamically loaded in. We call it out of band, I think is the feature we call it. And so there's where was I going with that? So yeah, we will add scripting as a way in the future to do that too. But to date, all the code is really in our runtime and happens in the runtime environment. So like if you're on the web, you're using WASM to run C++ on the web, and then you're using the JavaScript as to interface with the file, and we have an API that lets you kind of read the state machine and get the inputs and change the input on it. And so I think that's, again, Luigi would be able to answer this better than I can, but I think that's the core of the performance that we get, is that that runtime is really low level, and that because it's C++, we write it once and it runs everywhere. We use the same runtime on the web as we do in Unreal Engine. And there's very few cases where there's like porting of that language that has to happen. I believe there's like in Flutter, we have to port it to Dart, and there's some kind of interface layer in Unity, I think, maybe to go to C#. But again, that goes a bit beyond my domain. But for the most part, it is this low-level C++ runtime, and that's where really the performance comes from, is the runtime, and less the format. I think the format is just really lightweight.
Yeah, comparing it to something like Lottie, they use a big old JSON file. So I'm sure just by having your own formats that's binary, you can probably get a bunch of savings there. So you mentioned that the product is for more than just building like interactive graphics. Like most people, when they hear that, I think they think, oh, there's a hero image on my page. It's maybe an animated character. But you guys have much larger visions for what that means. So like, do you want me to build my entire website on Rive? Or is it just like some parts?
The website, I think the website is a bit of a stretch today. We have some accessibility stuff that we need to figure out first. There are best practices for making an entire canvas your website that you can follow today, and there'd be a lot of manual work that you'd have to do to make sure that it's all accessible. We do have plans in the editor to give you accessibility features to do a lot of that. So is there a day where you might build an entire website with Rive? Sure. Do we recommend it today? Probably not, but it depends on what you're trying to build. Like if you're trying to build a video game, maybe, and just run it full screen on a website. I think it's more the fact that we think the graphics that run in software, like there's an opportunity for Rive to become the ubiquitous format for that. like we talk about how people are using us today, they're using us, for like building design systems, for example, like functional design systems that you can actually ship. So that's one small like part of how people are using Rive, like making, but Duolingo uses us for all their characters. They also use us to make like their graphics, their like parts of their buttons, their like, grids and other things that like are very visual and very interactive that they can just build it once and then tie it into the different format. It runs on the web, it runs on iOS, it runs on Android, and they have that same kind of graphic that can react to data depending on what format it's on, and might have like some exposed things like fonts, like load the correct iOS fonts on iOS so that it looks like a iOS button. Or most of the time these folks are building really custom graphics that they don't want it to look like the default iOS thing, but you can do that if you want to. So that's one use case. But then there's other use cases like people building full-blown menus in games for every game engine is currently lacking a really great UI tooling. And the ones that are really good tend to be custom. Like there's custom game engines. We talked to the folks at Bungie that worked on Halo, and they have a really powerful engine that does a lot of really cool custom UI, but that's proprietary and only for that game. You're working on another game at Bungie and you don't have that engine, you're out of luck. You don't work at Bungie anymore and you're going to go work in another studio. You don't have that skill set anymore. And so like in games, there's a really big adoption of Rive and interest growing significantly over this last year, where there is no kind of design tool for those types of graphics. And so that's a really big area where people are creating, a really big experience, like full-blown menus and heads-up displays and all that type of stuff with Rive. Another big use case we can think about is like really custom stuff. Like you mentioned the website. Yeah, probably not, you might be building parts of a website and stuff like that. But like, for example, really custom software, like car dashboards and car displays and that type of stuff. That's an area where we're seeing like Rive take off, because the time to build that stuff is usually so long and the iteration process is so terrible and demoralizing for everyone involved, that if suddenly you can be actually sitting in the car with our editor, designing a gauge and the full cluster, and have it like connected to live data while the car is driving, and you're actually seeing it react and testing it as you're building it, like it crushes iteration time and means that you can be building it as you're driving. Hopefully someone else is driving the car, or maybe it's driving itself. But so those are some of the cases where you kind of hopefully helps open up like what we mean by a new way to build graphics, production ready graphics for software. And I think that there's so many use cases, and they're all kind of plagued by the same problems. This is something that someone might advise startups, like you need to focus, go for something small, find the tiny market and build that up. And our vision is a little different, because we think a format needs to become a new design format. You have to become ubiquitous, and the problems that are facing game developers are the same that are facing app developers like Duolingo, and are the same things that are facing car developers or people building graphics for TV. All software is affected by this problem of hard coding graphics, and so I think that it carries across all those verticals.
The idea of animation on embedded devices is very interesting. So in a different life, I was working with the Food Network team, and they had a TV app for like the Roku or something, right? And the Roku devices have like very, very little like capacity. So have you had customers who are actually building graphics on some embedded platforms?
Yep, we have. I think one we can share is, Google has been one of the earliest adopters of Rive from like 2019, when it was still the first version Luigi and I built, before it was the new version. And I think they ship on, Google Assistant ships on very, tiny device, like the bedside devices and stuff like that. There are other customers we can't share yet that are even tinier. And they're working with Rive. One of the big benefits of our new renderer is exactly this, that it it doesn't need new hardware to be fast, and it doesn't, because it's just a novel new way to render vector graphics. It doesn't rely on new hardware to do that. It's genuinely just a really cool new idea that the team came up with. And it also means lower memory, so it can run on more memory constrained devices. There is a little example on our Twitter that you can probably go find. One of our head of DevRel, Gordon, you can find, he's got an example of it running on some Android watch, where he's like tapping through different, screens and interacting with them. And those are all Rive graphics, and it's super performant, really animated, like 60 frames per second.
So when you're building those like more interactive experiences, like an app or a TV app or any of those, how much of the like state lives within the asset? Because like you have state machines, and you can, with a complicated enough state machine and inputs, like model a lot of stuff. So like, is there a sweet spot, or is it just totally up to the person?
It totally depends. Yeah, today I think without data binding and some of our layout features that are coming really soon, that's another feature we haven't talked about, that we're releasing a whole new layout engine that's going to be really powerful. That can do a lot of it, not your typical kind of auto layout. It can also animate and do a bunch of other stuff. Without that, I think it's, depending, like the watch is perfect. You can do that, right? Because it doesn't need to, you're not going to be resizing the window size or car dashboards and stuff like that. So stuff like that. But if you're developing for anything where you kind of have either a more complicated state engine or variable, layouts and stuff like that. So I don't want to say that you can do layouts today in Rive. You can use our blend states and other, you can use Rive, state machines to create breakpoints and have it change. And there are ways to do all that. But most of the time, you'd probably want to do something where you're kind of setting up your instances of your Rive object and controlling the overall state in the main app, like in your HTML or C++ if it's a custom engine of some sort. But there are people building things entirely with Rive. There was someone that shared the other day on Twitter, like a Unity menu that was all built in Rive, super animated, like the whole menu like pops up and it's a whole experience that's built in Rive. There's also, Age of Learning is one of our customers that pops up entire windows in their iOS and Android apps that are entire Rive themes. The entire UI is Rive, and they're actually, I've talked about them before. They're really cool because they use a lot of our inputs for the state machine, the text runs, that's like abilities to connect different parts of your text box, runs within the text box to data. And also we have an event system. We talked about inputs. There's also outputs from the Rive file. Our eventing system is how you get, how you pass data out from the Rive file back to the runtime. And so they use all of that. And, without data binding yet, they have a way to standardize all of that, so that the designer can basically, build a whole new menu and a whole new UI, and they can, because it's just a Rive file and they can serve it dynamically, they don't have to ship a new version of the app. They can just load a new Rive file, and provided those events and inputs and text runs have all stayed the same, they've empowered the designer to just build a whole new layout and a whole new UI that they can, A/B test and stuff like that. So yeah, there's the kind of cop-out answer is that it depends, and then there's people doing both. I think once we have data binding and layouts, which are coming very soon, you'll see a lot more like really crazy different experiences that will be enabled by having a design tool that lets you do that.